Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, What's New with SharePoint and OneDrive. We will give people just a few more minutes to join us, and then we'll get started. And I have with me today Daniel and Chris.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Seeing how much attendance we have in today's webinar, it seems that this topic is very popular. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and coming out of Ignite, it was amazing how much there was to digest. So I imagine many people who are on the call today are struggling to understand all its implications.
That's very true, Chris. Even you and I, who attended Ignite, and I've been working on this deck for a few weeks now, just found out, a few announcements that we even didn't know about a week ago. So it seems that there was quite a bit of information to digest.
Yeah, and one of the most challenging parts of a platform like Office 365 that's always changing is understanding the implications of that always changing nature of the platform. So it has some challenges, but some really good upsides that we hope to get into more today.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so let's get started.
Okay, sounds good. Just a few housekeeping items to go over. As always, we are recording the webinar. We will send out a link to the recording and a copy of the slide deck later on this afternoon. We're going to try to keep it to 45 minutes. I know we have a lot of information to cover. We will be 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. Please submit your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar panel. We'll monitor them throughout the session and address them at the end. And with that, Daniel, if you'd like to introduce yourself and get started.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Kawandumani. I am a partner in charge here at Witham, in charge of our Microsoft Solution and Services. We were formerly known as Portal Solution, and our firm merged with Witham Smith & Brown effective May 1st this year. So we're excited to bring this webinar today. We're going to talk a lot about Office 365, Microsoft SharePoint, OneDrive. Personally, I've been involved in the space of digital workplace and digital transformation for over 15 years. And, I've been in the SharePoint space since 2002. So it's been great to see the evolution of the platform over the last 15 years, and specifically over the last 12 and 24 months with the innovation that Microsoft is bringing to the cloud. And then a little tidbit, I started working with SharePoint when nobody could even spell the word. So that tells you how long I've been in that space. And with me today, I'm pleased to have Chris Petit, which is a consultant, senior consultant here with us. Chris, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Daniel. As Daniel mentioned, my name is Chris Petit. I am a senior UX consultant here at Witham, and I have been in the UX space for almost 15 years, and I've been doing SharePoint specific implementations and designs for just closing in on a decade right now. And my interests are largely around user experience, research, and design. But one thing we're going to get a lot to here is very interested in how Office 365 as a platform is growing and helping clients manage all the challenges with such a changing platform.
Excellent. So everyone, feel free to send your questions along the way. We'll try to either respond to them if it's relevant as we cover some of the topics, or we'll keep some time towards the end of the webinar. A little word about Witham Microsoft Solutions Services. Our team has been in business for over 15 years, doing what we talk about: SharePoint, modern workplace, implementation, cloud strategy. We have a managed services division, a data analytics division, and we get involved with enterprise mobility, dynamics, everything cloud-related platform, a Microsoft cloud-related platform. We've done over 350 plus Office 365 and SharePoint implementation over the last 15 years, and we've been working closely with Microsoft for many, many years as part of early adopter program, preview program, NDA. So a lot of the things that Microsoft has talked and introduced at Ignite are features that we've known for months now and been involved in private testing as well. Our team is about 50 people strong. Witham as a whole is about 1,000 people now across the northeast of the United States. So let's get started. The agenda today we're going to distill those announcements from Ignite. There were a lot, right? And Chris mentioned earlier, there were a lot of announcements on SharePoint and OneDrive. We'll talk about future other announcements in future webinars as well. But we want to give you some key takeaways. We're going to start with talking about those, and we're going to end the webinar with more takeaways for you all. And then we'll talk lastly about our next webinars that is coming in a few weeks. So let's talk about those key takeaways. Chris and I sat during the week in Orlando, and there were a lot of announcements. It started during the keynote, lots of announcements on SharePoint and OneDrive. Those announcements really made us think that if you are an organization that have considered moving to Office 365, or is there but haven't really fulfilled, or is fully using the platform, now is really a prime time to start planning your migration. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. One key takeaway, and Chris, tell us what you think about, the importance of strategy when it comes to migrating to Office 365.
Yeah, so I think before, Office 365 struggled with a lot of growing pains in its evolution into its current state. But what we're really seeing this year, and especially going forward, it's reaching a pinnacle of maturity to move into it. But as the platform grows and expands in lots of different ways, it becomes more important to think strategically how you're going to use each of those pieces and how they talk to each other. So we're going to talk about lots of features and lots of great things that are coming, but it really highlights some of the complexity that comes with it too. And so thinking through holistically your solution from beginning to end is more important now than ever.
That's a great point, Chris. All right, so we're going to start with a poll. We'd like to know, and that will help us guide the conversation today about what feature and workload you are currently using on Office 365, assuming you are on Office 365. So you can have multiple choice here. Please select your options here. Okay, so it looks like a lot of folks here are using SharePoint Online, and half of the audience is on Microsoft Teams. That's very interesting, right? So we've seen that across a lot of our clients, a lot of our prospective clients have started using Microsoft Teams. We're going to talk a little bit about Teams today. Our next webinar is all around Teams. But feel free to ask questions, because as you probably know, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams are more integrated than ever. All right, so let's get in the gist of things here. One of the things that Microsoft talk a lot about at Ignite is the momentum that Microsoft has seen. There are more than 100 million users of Office 365 Commercial Edition. So that includes small business as well as Enterprise Edition. More than 300,000 organizations have SharePoint and OneDrive in Office 365. And that includes, obviously, large organizations. 85% of the Fortune 500 are using some sort of SharePoint and OneDrive in the cloud. More than 60% of all the SharePoint seats are now online, and that's huge. You think about 2 years ago, this number was lower than 20%. And 35% are on-premise licenses. So over the last 2 years, we've seen a exponential shift to the cloud. There's been a growth in active users. It's one thing to be on Office 365. It's one thing to be using it actively. So Microsoft has seen almost 100% growth in 1 year. OneDrive is becoming more and more popular, and a lot of the reason for that is this new OneDrive file synchronization technology, which has been a huge pain point years ago. Microsoft fixed it about a year ago, and that has driven a lot of growth into the OneDrive file sync. Microsoft has continued to be recognized both by Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester Waves as a leader in 6 different areas. And lastly, as we can see in our poll, Microsoft Teams is now being used by over 125,000 organizations, right? So that's roughly half of the total organization using SharePoint are also using Teams. So that's a staggering number. knowing that team is less than 9 months old. So we'll start talking about SharePoint. So Chris, tell us a little bit about what that big announcement around SharePoint Hub Sites.
So when I attended in Orlando Ignite, the keynote session around SharePoint and OneDrive, it was very obvious that the Microsoft team was very excited, and this was going to be one of the most significant announcements to SharePoint Online since the advent of the modern site experience. And that really revolves, as Daniel mentioned, around these hub sites. So if we advance the slides, we'll talk about what are some of the particular areas of hub sites and the advantages that they bring in. And if you want to go ahead and advance, Sasha. So let's talk about some of the things that are brought in. The biggest part of an issue that is solved by hub sites is how hub sites are related together. Before, when we would create modern sites, they were completely siloed from one another in their search, their presentation, and how all different content is pulled together. A hub site solves many of those challenges. And what it does, it allows you to associate these individual modern sites, whether they're the new team sites or the even newer communication sites, into one hub. And these bring several functional benefits to SharePoint. One of the most important is shared navigation. So before, there was no way to logically associate together different modern sites. Now we get a shared navigation experience that's very, very reminiscent of what we had in older SharePoint in the classic experience with sites and subsites. You can now relate them together. They're now rolling out new abilities to have a common theme across them. So if you create a new modern site and you associate it to a hub, it'll automatically inherit that navigation as well as the look and feel. Microsoft is rolling out a new theming engine. And there are other functional pieces as well, such as news aggregation. So if you're in another modern site that's a part of a hub and you're publishing news, that can be brought up and rolled together both in the browser itself and on native applications as well, such as the iPhone application. And then a couple other important things is that search is now available across all these modern sites. Before, they were siloed from one another. Now, associating a hub, I can search across all the sites that are associated within that specific hub. So it's a key need for many of the clients that we work with is universal search that brings all these different pieces together. And in reality, this really provides the basic building blocks of what we need to use modern sites in a common intranet platform. So before, the main use case that the Microsoft team solved for modern sites was for more microsites or one-off creation of different content needs. Now we can now relate them to each other and have a really robust intranet using hub sites and modern sites within them. And so let's talk about just real quickly what hub sites are for. So for a small organization, you can really use these as your main intranet and entry into your digital workplace. But Daniel, I want to ask you about, for larger organizations you're working with, you're providing even more benefit for larger organizations, right?
Yeah, so, there were a lot of questions following Ignite about is the hub site your intranet, right? And frankly, people have asked you, are we still going to need, consulting services to do that? And the short answer is the hub site is the starting block, right? The starting building block to create an intranet or a digital workplace. Again, a small organization will probably meet all the needs. A larger organization will need, a larger presence, right? So a hub site is really a collection of sites. It could be your division intranet. If you're a very large organization, it could be a departmental hub. It could be a location hub. But at the end, you're still going to need an overreaching intranet or digital workplace, right? Microsoft said in a Q&A at Ignite that they have not thought about a hub of a hub concept, right? Which is really what an intranet or digital workplace is, where you have hubs and you need a overreaching hub behind that, right? So that's where I think there's a lot of thinking that's needed. You're still going to need a homepage or multiple homepage of your intranet, and that in the current state of things will still require some design, some implementation, maybe some custom development as well. All right, so moving on to the next announcement. Microsoft has announced its commitment to continue to deliver on-premise version of SharePoint, but not only SharePoint, Office 2019, Exchange, and Skype for Business, right? There's still organizations that will require some level of on-premise footprint, mostly in many cases hybrid deployments of maybe Exchange, maybe SharePoint, maybe Skype for Business, and obviously an Office desktop clients, right? Now, in the meantime, when Office 2016 was released, there's been continuous update, right? So if you're on Office Pro Plus, on Office 365, you've seen updates on a quarterly basis, but there will be an official package of Office 2019, will be available in preview sometime next summer and release at the end of 2018. So if you're on a premise user, obviously Microsoft wants you to move to the cloud, but you can do it at your pace, right? There'll be new version of SharePoint coming up on premise 2019. That may be the last one, we don't know, but clearly there's still on-premise capability that will be deployed over the next couple of years. All right, Chris, one of the other announcements was about web parts, right? And why don't you talk a little bit when we touched that subject about the SharePoint framework as well, right? Because that's something that, there were not specific announcements. It's been out for almost a year and a half now. Tell us more about the SharePoint framework and the web parts that are available with SharePoint Online.
Sure. Let's talk first about the out-of-the-box web parts that are provided to you now in SharePoint Online. If you are familiar with working SharePoint in the classic experience, they had a very long history of having, for the most part, very robust web parts to roll up content, to do transformations on content. But the modern site experiences they started to roll out, it was very shallow compared to what was offered in classic sites. But thankfully, we're seeing Microsoft begin to augment that more and more and more with common use cases, and they're putting out lots of new modern web parts. And some are really exciting, such as the new Yammer conversation embed. So if you're familiar with the past of bringing Yammer into SharePoint, you had to get a URL, and it was essentially just an embed of a Yammer conversation. But now you have a much more native, much more responsive experience that allows you to have all kinds of options, such as if you want to highlight certain conversations versus just a chronological thread of Yammer conversations. They're also introducing all kinds of new abilities to view content. We'll talk a little bit more of that in OneDrive later this hour. And then talking about the SharePoint framework, it was also like the modern site, something that came out. It was very immature in its beginning, but now we're starting to see it ramp up significantly. And a lot of abilities, if you're a developer or working with a client or internally in your organization that wants to augment a lot of what these modern sites provide, over the next 3 to 6 months, they're going to unveil lots of new capabilities that allow you to build new web parts or customize the user interface that you couldn't do before. So Daniel, lots of exciting things on the web part end. So they're not only releasing hub sites, but more extensibility within the modern sites as well.
That's great. And to clarify that with the audience who may not be familiar with the concept of classic versus modern, when we talk about classic site, this is the SharePoint we've all known for 15 years. Publishing infrastructures and team sites using the infrastructure that's been there since 2002 or 2003, essentially. The modern team site, however, is a complete new infrastructure that Microsoft has been working on for the last almost 3 years now. It started with a framework called the SharePoint Framework, which is a modern, responsive, client-side framework that uses a very modern tool set. One of the big pain points with web part development in the past was, hey, you needed to be a SharePoint developer to create a web part. Nowadays, with the SharePoint framework, you just need to be a web modern developer to be able to create a web part, right? It's using very modern tool set, using JavaScript framework if you want to, React or Angular or other framework, Bootstrap. So it's much easier to create web part. It's cloud first. Easy to deploy. There's no upgrade dependency like there were in the past. So it's a first very modern experience, right? So when we talk about classic, the old SharePoint, modern, the new one, and by the way, those web parts and the framework is supported in classic site on SharePoint Online, right? So if you build modern web part, they will work with your older SharePoint site as well. Now, one announcement that came also that we didn't highlight here specifically, it was announced prior to Ignite, is the availability of the SharePoint framework for SharePoint 2016 on premise, right? Now, let's not get too excited about it. You get a scaled-down version of the SharePoint framework, right, but not the full experience, right? So some web parts will not work on premise as well. So that was one of the other announcements here that came. So lots of excitement. We can see, you know, the building block getting larger and giving us more capability to build rapid intranet and develop rapid solution on the SharePoint Online framework. All right, so the next thing is, for those of you like me that have been on the SharePoint world for a long time, we've all known that SharePoint lists were not known to scale very well, right? As a matter of fact, in the older version of SharePoint, we said, hey, you know, maybe the limit was 5,000 items in a list, right? That limit was enhanced over the years. But even with SharePoint Online, there was a known limitation of 5,000 that triggers some throttling, and you have to do some indexing and things, complexity to get to large document library or large list. So now the limit is 30 million items, right? So you can create very large document libraries, very large lists, and look at the tenant limit has now been extended to 30 trillion documents per tenant, right? So that's a very large deployment if you get to that many documents. So you still need to break down into different document libraries, but you'll be able to store up to 30 million items or document in a SharePoint list. So how does that work? Essentially, what Microsoft is doing is rolling out some predictive indexing that essentially will do this manual work of throttling that you had to deal with in the past automatically, right? So, you know, the Microsoft infrastructure will detect that this is a large list and will optimize itself automatically to support large-scale document library of lists. This is not yet available, but will be available in the fourth quarter this year. So it's predicted that by the end of this year, many of you will see this capability. All right. So moving on to the next slide here. Chris, tell us about the new search experience. There were a lot of sessions talking about search in Office 365 and specifically around SharePoint.
Right. So let's talk about the search experience. Now, when Microsoft released their modern sites, they did have a search experience, but it was very limited compared to what we're used to in SharePoint. As I mentioned earlier, without the addition of a hub site, you couldn't even search across these sites. But now things are changing from the ground up on these new modern search experiences. The most important of which is that now these searches are being powered by the graph. If you're not familiar with that, it's an underlying technology that allows personalized results, either in the context of the application known as Delve in Office 365, or in this case, Search, that are more personalized and supposed to be smarter for you. So instead of in the old world where we would just make a search query and would just pull from a standard index based on simple matching, now we're using artificial intelligence powered by the graph to return results. And from the screenshot, you can see there's a richer result too here from people cards, the refiners, and how the search are actually broken out. So the important thing to note, though, as you go forward and you think about the modern search experience, is that while it's exciting in a lot of ways, it doesn't have a lot of the extensibility points that we were used to in classic search results. So it's another factor when we're thinking about modern versus classic experiences. And if you have any questions about that, I know Daniel and I would love to talk to you about navigating those challenges, because we're working with several clients of all shapes and sizes to think through those implications. But overall, a very exciting enhancement to the search experience in SharePoint Online.
And that's great to know, Chris, because up to now, people were thinking, well, if I want to search personalized, I have to go to Delve. Delve experience was very limited. And it's good to see that now we'll be able to do that inside of a SharePoint intranet or SharePoint site, right? Now, what's important too is that, you know, what this new search experience is telling us is Microsoft is using a lot of their AI capability and machine learning to help the user navigate to the very large result set of searches, right? So where in the past we had to spend a lot of times, weeks, and you and our clients had to spend time tweaking and optimizing their search, what we're going to see more and more is the system will optimize itself, and the results will become more relevant as people use the system and become more familiar with the capability. All right, so continuing on the topic of SharePoint announcement, Chris, we had some new announcement as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about a few of the other highlights before we move into some additional PowerApps features and then eventually OneDrive. So there are other exciting ones too, such as significant performance improvements in Office Online. And if you're not familiar with Office Online, it's the ability to go and edit your Word, Excel, PowerPoint documents inside the browser. There used to be significant struggles around performance and response. Now that's being improved significantly to allow you to work without the need of a native application on your computer. And co-authoring support is now available in Excel 2016. So that's very exciting, bring it to the parity with Microsoft Word and PowerPoint as well. Now, another thing that's gotten significant improvement, Daniel mentioned earlier the performance improvements for large lists, but all new features are available now inside of your lists and libraries, and a couple of them are worth highlighting. One of which is new column formatting options. So with just a little bit of JSON, which will eventually, they'll allow you to do this with a interface inside of the theme itself, but right now, you can just put a little bit of code in there and bring all kind of column formatting inside the modern experience. So let's say if you're running a key performance indicator, you want it to be a certain background color at a certain value, you could do this rather simply inside of a modern experience list and library. The other thing that's exciting is attention views. So this is a new feature that's been unveiled. You can see in the screenshot on the right that when you have mandatory metadata that's uploaded and it's not filled out, you can actually highlight that within a view, make it easy to go in and fill in those gaps very easily. Then lastly, hybrid has also been supported. It's continued to be extended. And hybrid really seems to be the position Microsoft wants to push you in if you have existing on-premises needs that allow you to bring in a lot of the functionality from Office 365. And so it continues to expand with the addition of hybrid content types. So if you're managing content types, the term store, et cetera, other kinds of information assets, you can now bring those in parity across Office Online and on your on-premises deployment. So lots of exciting things that are available. And one of those things, Daniel, if you want to talk about next, are SharePoint Analytics and that extension in the platform.
Yeah, and before we get into analytics, Chris, the attention view is a nice feature, right? So if you're thinking about large document library with thousands of documents, those attention view can bring attention to you, right? So maybe missing metadata or other rules that you can put in the system to highlight important documents that you want to see. All right, so moving on into analytics, I think this is a hot topic, right? Because, you know, if you start using and building a solution such as an intranet or a document management solution in SharePoint Online, knowing how it's being used is critical, right? And in the past, there were a known issue. It was a known factor that analytics in Microsoft SharePoint on premise or even online weren't that great. And Microsoft is fully aware of this challenge. And they started to give us building blocks of better analytics. Of course, this is a starting point. But at this point, you'll be able to see the metrics that are listed here on the screen and be able to analyze those directly within SharePoint to see trending content, historical views, likes and comments on documents as well as items across your SharePoint site. So again, we're not saying you won't need any third-party tools or custom solution for analytics, but if your needs are simpler, at least you'll have something out of the box within the Microsoft Office 365 platform. All right, so Chris, tell us a little bit about this new SharePoint Admin Center.
Yeah, so in the administration experience for Office 365, the SharePoint administration experience for a long time has not received any attention from Microsoft, and that is changing now with a completely revamped administration center. Now, as you'll see as we talk through this session, you'll hear about new features and additions being rolled out that start small and then eventually get evolved over time, and that'll be the same for the administration center. But there are great new things that were previously unavailable inside of the user interface, such as the experience itself is much more streamlined from what it was in the old admin interface. There's now the ability to a recycling bin that you can easily go and recover deleted sites. Significant improvements in how you actually report on all the sites that are available to you, created inside of your tenant, and managing them. And external sharing is also something that has received some significant improvements. We'll talk about it a little bit later on too within SharePoint. There's also improved compliance and management over all these different things. So Daniel, overall, this is a good start to what we hope over time will evolve into a more and more robust administration center.
Yeah, and I think Chris was right, and I think it's true across the entire SharePoint Online capability. The administrative interface are kind of the second stepchild of a lot of Microsoft attention. And we're seeing here that they're paying attention to the administrative aspect of SharePoint with the new administrative center. We've been testing it for a few weeks. We're not too excited about it just yet, but it's a start in the right direction. And we're going to see now over the next few months, I think that will get released in October, and you'll see more and more capability being rolled out into this new admin center. All right, so migration tool, and that was interesting. This came out of nowhere. I think that very few people knew about this project within Microsoft. There's now a free of charge migration tool for SharePoint and OneDrive. Now I'm going to emphasize the word here. It's a simple and easy to use tool to migrate content from either SharePoint on-premise, file shares, or other SharePoint Online. In theory, we'll support very large migration, but it's simple. So if your needs are moving to file share to OneDrive or file share to SharePoint, SharePoint to SharePoint, and you're not trying to transform a lot during migration, guess what? You have now a migration tool available directly from Microsoft. Now, of course, many of you will have more complex migration needs, and you're still going to need some third-party migration tool. But it's good to see that for simple cases, which we had plenty of, there's now an option that's available directly from Microsoft and at no fees. All right, so Chris, PowerApps to customize lists. And we know that, one of the power of SharePoint has often been the capability to customize a list using SharePoint Designer, right? Yep. And that kind of went away with SharePoint Online, right? There's no more Designer as such. So tell us about PowerApps, Flow, and specifically what was announced at Ignite.
Yep, PowerApps and Flow are another example of a set of applications that Microsoft unveils, and they continue to evolve over time. So in its initial states, its utility is often limited to very specific use cases, but both of these applications inside of 365 are also receiving significant upgrades, specifically around the ability to integrate these tools within the SharePoint modern experience itself, the two being Flow and PowerApps, as I mentioned. Now, PowerApps, now as you can see in the screenshot, allows you to create a borderline custom application with inside of the modern experience. So no longer do you have to direct users outside of SharePoint Online in that list experience to do something. Now you can use PowerApps right inside of it to build very robust solutions with just a browser application itself. Flow is also something. So Flow is Microsoft's new workflow engine that allows you to accomplish much. And when it initially released, again, the story behind it was very limited, but now they're unveiling more and more. So now as a first-party workflow solution, you can do a lot with the combination of PowerApps and Flow together. So it's an exciting advancement that exists in SharePoint Online. And Daniel, I don't know about you, but now we're actually evaluating PowerApps and Flow for use in client engagements now because its maturity is getting to the point where it can be an effective solution.
We are, and we spend a lot of time talking with the PowerApps team at Ignite. It's a very large team within Microsoft, so clearly we know there's a tremendous amount of investment being done. One thing we know is their goal is to give parity to what was possible in SharePoint Designer, both from a workflow standpoint and from a list customization standpoint, right? So if you guys were used to use Designer and you know that it's not available anymore, you'll have to look at PowerApps and Flow. It's not there yet from a parity standpoint, so you used to be able to do things with Designer that you still can't do yet with Flow and PowerApps, but because it's a cloud platform, it is being updated on a monthly basis, and there's a public roadmap available. So lots of things are coming here, and we see that screenshot here of a list that was customized to show very rich content, and that content is actually stored in a SharePoint list. So very exciting things that will be able to get done. All right, so I think that's the last announcement we had on the SharePoint side, and obviously there were many more, but this caught my attention because personally this is something I've requested for at least 4 years now that we've been working with Office 365. We've done a lot of work with large organizations, global organization, with offices spanning the world. And as you all know, up to today, you had to have a tenant in, one geography, right? So if you're a global organization with a tenant in the United States, all your data were following the regulation of that country, and you had to access this through, a lengthy, slow network connection. So the good news now is you're able to span SharePoint site across multiple geography. So think about that concept. You have a tenant in the US, but you want to create a site in Australia. You'll be able, and you are available now, if you turn it on, you're able to create a site inside your tenant that's physically located in a different continent and a different country. Most regions that host Office 365, at the exception of France, is now available. And that's huge for a lot of different reasons. Speed and performance, for those of you that have offices in different continents, close to an Office 365 data center. But the most important reason is regulation and data protection. Specifically in Europe, with the upcoming deadline with GDPR coming next year, there will be strong data protection regulation in a lot of different countries, and having your data stored in a specific region will become more and more important. So that's great news. It was finally announced, it's finally available, and our clients and you all can take advantage of that starting today. Okay, Chris, so let's talk about what implication exists when it comes to SharePoint Online. Tell us about this first one here.
Yeah. So one thing to note is that parity from what you knew from an existing publishing site infrastructure is not currently there, and that even the model that they're moving towards is a different one from what we're used to. So there are some things to navigate there and understand how things functionally are moving in different directions, and both in the short term and long term. So it's important to note that the world that we left behind in the classic one, they're bringing parity on some level, but they're also going forward with a new approach. So our solutions need to cater towards and move towards that direction.
And Chris, that's a key takeaway, right? Because a lot of our clients are asking us, well, I'm used to those publishing sites and those team sites. Can you replicate this online? And our answer is, we can do some of it, but I think you have to think differently, right? You have to approach the problem differently, because there's new capability with sometimes will surpass what you had on premise, and sometimes will be very different to how it was on premise.
Absolutely.
Okay, the next one is, and that's important for all of us. If you guys had a chance to listen to the keynote, one of the first demonstration that was given that day was around Microsoft Teams, right? And truly, Microsoft Teams started as a side project with Microsoft. It was, hey, we have to have it. We have to compete with Slack and HipChat, and here's our product. And I can tell you over the next 9 months, both within Microsoft thinking, within our clients thinking, and within our strategy here internally at Witham, we are rethinking what Microsoft Teams means for deployment. It is becoming a key component of your digital workplace, right? And that's something that we've heard loud and clear, and that we've experienced with a lot of our clients and prospective clients. So there's a lot of integration coming. As Microsoft developed their story about integrating SharePoint with other workloads, such as Yammer and Teams, Office Group and Planner and Power BI, more integration is coming. And the last one is critical, right? A lot of folks, and I'm sure we'll have a question today about when is it coming, right? Well, the good news is it's coming soon. The bad news is we can't tell you, and often Microsoft can't even tell you when, right? So there's a concept of first release, right? So if you're opting in for first release, you will get the rollout first. And that usually takes about 4 weeks to 8 weeks to roll out for the first release, sometimes 90 days, and then everyone else, right? There have been features that have been rolled out in a week, and some that have taken 3 months, right? So again, the planning is critical, right? So you can plan to use those features. You may need to use a developer tenant first. So there's a lot of thinking to do. And, you know, not everyone will get it at the same time, right? So while they're all here and exciting, again, planning for the proper deployment is critical. Okay, Chris, tell us for OneDrive here.
All right. I'll try and move through these because I know we have to be cognizant of our time. So let's start talking through some of the exciting OneDrive announcements. So several of these also to keep in mind, since the OneDrive technology that exists in the library experience in OneDrive also applies for SharePoint document library. So that's an exciting thing that they're being brought together. So one thing is they're now coming out with new preview file handlers. So everything from 3D graphical models to Adobe Creative Cloud files can now be previewed right inside of a browser. A really welcome advancement that, as far as I know, no one other than Microsoft has managed to solve yet. There are new abilities we're going to talk about in the next slide about doing files on demand. So now you can just pull down those specific pieces you need from OneDrive or other SharePoint sites. And as Daniel mentioned earlier, Multi-Geo support applies both to OneDrive usage as well as SharePoint. So if you move a user to a different geographical tenant, their OneDrive also moves there as well, and Microsoft will provide you additional reporting capabilities. If we move forward, we'll talk briefly about OneDrive Files on Demand, which is now available with the Fall Creator Update. What this allows you to do is, if you have a significant amount of files in your OneDrive for Business environment, and they provide you very healthy quotas for using OneDrive for Business, you can now choose and selectively say, I want these particular files or these particular folders, but still see all those files as available to you. So it's a really great advancement that allows you to be much more selective in those files that you want to take forward and work offline. And one other thing to mention as we advance forward is an improved user interface and performance that exists in OneDrive. So you can see there's additional enhancements to the UI for OneDrive for Business, and that extends not just from the web application, but also to their native mobile applications as well. So there's a lot of significant advancements that have been rolled into OneDrive for Business. And Daniel, I think you would agree with me. We've talked extensively that this is an exciting development to see OneDrive and SharePoint really mature alongside one another.
From a user experience standpoint as well, and to add back to your files on demand comment, Chris, that's often a pain point, right? Because we know that a lot of our users are comfortable using Windows Explorer to find files, and in the past you could connect a OneDrive to your desktop, even a SharePoint library to your desktop, but you had to download the entire content. With this file on demand technology, you'll be able to see all the files, but they're being downloaded to your desktop on demand, right? So that if you don't use it, it doesn't take space on your computer, and you can access them as you wish. And essentially continue to use Windows Explorer to access all your files. There's also, Chris, a new sharing experience, and that's been out for quite a while now. What's new is this account or security, one-time use security code. If you can see here on the left side of our screen, you're now able to share content with people with just giving them a one-time code. And that's powerful if you want to share a document, even for editing purposes with someone, give them access to that document for 5 days, but don't have them go through a logging process or create a Microsoft account or figure out how to log in. All they have to do is put a code and they can access and download and edit your document. So that simplifies the experience. On the right part of the screen is this new link settings. That's available both in OneDrive and SharePoint. That is streamlined, easier user experience. And by the way, if you use Office 2016 and you have the latest update, you'll see that same window pop up in Office 2016. So that wherever you are in Office, in OneDrive, in SharePoint, when you share something, either inside your organization or outside the organization, you'll have the same user experience. And that's a big deal from a user training and governance standpoint. Chris, how about Microsoft Flow? So it's now supported in OneDrive too?
Yeah, so as we talked about Flow and PowerApps, their maturity as they're coming along, it's really great to see Microsoft not keeping it only resolved to a SharePoint library-only solution. Now you can bring those same capabilities inside of Flow. So you can see from the screenshot, someone can go in, create a flow based on files that are within their OneDrive. And as Daniel mentioned earlier, the SharePoint framework is also evolving so we can extend functionality using the framework in both SharePoint Online and the List Library experience as well as OneDrive. So if you're creating a certain customization that needs to be deployed and used across OneDrive and SharePoint, Microsoft is providing that ability now.
Fantastic. And I can see a lot of ideas of things we can do, right? Hey, I have this document, I want to promote that to a SharePoint site. Let's start a flow process that will send it out and put it into the right place. So that's really exciting. And then Chris, to the same token, were there improvement on the admin center for OneDrive as well?
Yes, and this is also an exciting piece. Again, we're starting to watch its development. Right now, it's a little bit limited, but as far as the experience, the interfaces presented, and the reporting, it's significantly improved over what we had originally. So now we have improved reporting and analytics on usage. And keep in mind, if you do use a multi-geo solution, the Office 365 OneDrive Center will provide you analytics based on those different geographical regions. So that's an exciting way to look across the usage in your tenant based on geographic regions. There's also new reports available to you on file activity and active accounts. And importantly, as Daniel mentioned, the experience is changing to allow external usage in a much more robust way, but also provided with that, Microsoft knows that admins need the ability to manage that. So there are new security management options and abilities for administrators to control in a much more fine-grained way how the OneDrive is used externally and internally. And Daniel, if you want to talk about next, one of the exciting advancements is OneDrive file recovery that was announced at Ignite.
Yes, indeed. So OneDrive recovery, as you all know, in SharePoint, in OneDrive, you're able to keep versions, multiple versions of a document, but sometimes you may delete a file, or badly a file will get corrupted. And what if the last 20 versions have gotten corrupted for whatever reason? So you're not able to restore files at a point in time and go back to where it was. And essentially, this is using versioning capability, but this is a nice user interface to be able to do that across multiple files. So Chris, what are the key takeaways in terms of OneDrive and file improvements?
So yes, as we look into our final set of key takeaways, the last thing to keep in mind is file management on native applications for OneDrive. That's very important for a lot of our clients to be able to see to and ubiquitously get to their files that are within OneDrive and manage them. Lots of great improvements, such as the Android app supporting on-premise deployments. If you're a Mac user like I am, oftentimes the experience has been harder for you in a lot of different ways, but Microsoft has really paid a lot of attention to that platform and improved Office, not only for the Mac, but also its integration with Office 365. So now the OneDrive client will be installed with your Mac installation packages. And just generally new experiences both in using and sharing across OneDrive in all their mobile applications. So it's some really important advancements to help that adoption within inside of your organization. And so if we turn forward, we're going to talk about some key takeaways from OneDrive as we go forward. So I think, Daniel, I think you would agree with this, that we were all kind of questioning what was SharePoint's future a couple of years ago. Would it live as an independent application or be broken out? But from Ignite, we're clearly seeing that there is a renewed interest and focus on SharePoint as an application.
That's right. And not only that, we're seeing SharePoint used across a lot of different capabilities, right? If you guys use Microsoft Teams, which 50% of the audience said they are, Microsoft Teams use SharePoint for file storage, right? And one of the announcements that we'll talk in our next webinar is the ability to add a SharePoint use page inside Teams, right? So we're seeing kind of the strategy coming to play here, where SharePoint is becoming not only a first citizen here in terms of new capability, but also a backend capability to power storage, document storage, news storage for a lot of the other Microsoft Office and even Microsoft Dynamics capability inside the Microsoft Cloud Platform. Now, Chris, we still need a lot of planning, right?
Yes, and I think the one thing to take away from this, if there is one overarching takeaway, is, wow, the Office 365 platform is maturing very quickly, very rapidly, and very robustly. But again, managing that and how to think through that requires more strategy than ever. You have to answer questions like, how will our organization think about the new modern search experiences? Or in the classic versus modern experiences, what do we know what we're getting and what we're not getting? And how should we plan our information management solutions? So there's a lot of great stuff coming down, but it just necessitates the need to think across the platform about how you're going to use Office 365. And I think our final take, go ahead, Daniel.
And Chris, I wanted to say, you've seen that firsthand in a few projects you've been involved with over the last few months that are using modern sites, right?
Yeah, we're actually working right now. I'm working primarily on a project with a client who's a multinational organization that's very excited about the new improvements, specifically around performance in the modern site experiences. But it's taken a lot of time to think through with them all the implications and to help them come to a decision that best matches their organization. So it's something that with them uniquely is suited to provide to help clients think through these different decision points.
And one of the key takeaway here, Chris, is you said it's walled out but not ready to use. And that's, an important key takeaway here for the audience is, because it's walled out doesn't mean that it's ready to use. And I think that's where the planning and testing and getting comfortable with. For some organizations, that may be ready, but for some, it may not. And I think that's another key takeaway here.
Absolutely.
And then the last thing here is that, we're seeing more and more parity between SharePoint document management and OneDrive, both from a user experience standpoint, as well as from a on-premise capability with content type and hybrid content types, and those capabilities are now available into the modern document library experience across SharePoint and OneDrive as well. All right, so we're going to open up here for some Q&A. Let's see. Sasha, we have a few questions here, right?
We do. Let's see. So of course, a popular question is, when are these updates that we talked about are released for SharePoint Online?
Well, we can have a webinar just talking about this, right? The hub site we know are not coming until Q1 of 2018. The rest of what was announced is going to be rolling out in the next quarter, Q4, between October, November, and December this year. Obviously, we will keep our audience updated on the rollout of those features. Specifically about when we know, we're actually probably thinking about putting a blog post around when are we getting what from an Office 365 standpoint.
Okay. Let's see. So we have another one. With this new vision of hub sites tying together modern team sites and communication sites, should we be planning migrations to those templates? Right now, we have a very developed set of site collections and many sub-sites, all in the classic templates. Is there a migration path, or is Microsoft expecting people?
That's a great question. We hear that a lot, right? So what do I do with my existing SharePoint on-premise or SharePoint online, right? It's classic. It's using a hierarchy. the short answer is there is no plan as of today, and it doesn't mean that in Ignite next year it will be different, to upgrade a classic site to a modern site, which means that, in most cases, you have to rethink your navigation, your taxonomy, come up with a new approach, and then move the content over, right? And now, because Microsoft has a migration tool, moving content in SharePoint Online isn't that hard. But essentially, you can't just push a button and upgrade. You have to build a new environment and move the content over. Why? Because it's very much different in the background, right? There's not a one-to-one parity, and I think you need someone to make the decision on how to migrate things from the old paradigm to the new one.
There's one that's a little bit specific. Someone is building a new SharePoint Online site for a document management system, and they're looking for a way to create multiple hyperlinks within one image.
That's an interesting question, and I'm suspected this was done with Designer, right? So the short answer is you can't do that with SharePoint Designer on SharePoint Online. So your only way out is to consider the option of using PowerApps as a way to customize the list and be able to do things like that, or to use custom development with the SharePoint framework that is available now to customize your list rendering, right? So PowerApps is the no-code option, and then SharePoint framework will require some development to do that. All right. So that concludes the questions we have here. We want to thank Chris. Thank you for joining me today. I want to remind everyone about our upcoming webinar on November 16th at the same time. We're going to talk about Microsoft Teams, a new announcement, roadmap, and more importantly, strategy. What is Microsoft Teams, right? We had a great question about, how do I move those existing templates? But the short answer is, you have to think holistically, right? Some of those may become Microsoft Teams, right? And you may not move them into SharePoint sites, right? So that's coming up on November 16th. On November 29th, we will have a specific webinar talking about digital transformation for healthcare. We have a lot of healthcare, hospital clients, and we're going to have a specific audience and topic around digital transformation in the world of healthcare. We have a link here if you want to learn more about Microsoft Jeff Teeper's blog. A lot of the content we talked today was summarized into this collection of blog posts. You can click the link. But more importantly, we will be happy to have a one-on-one consultation with any of you today that have attended, those who register, or even those of you that are playing the recording. We'll be happy to have a one-on-one consultation to talk about what's the implication with what you have, how you're going to move, and how we could potentially help you make this migration successful. So with that, thanks all for joining us today.